Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 8 preview and we're going to look at some of your key questions around things such as captaincy, transfers in, transfers out, bandwagons, wildcards and much more. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, we're going to start today's video by discussing the mid-price midfielders in FPL at the moment that might be worth purchasing. We've got all the way from 5.6 million to 7.5 million. And the reason for this discussion is twofold. Firstly, I'm recording this on Tuesday and we got news today that Eze could be out for as long as 6 weeks. And even if he's only out for a few game weeks, it's probably still worth selling him because there are a plethora of options with really good fixtures coming up. I do actually think Eze was a good option for what it's worth, but it is looking like it's going to be worth selling him. And I'm actually recording this after the Champions League games on Tuesday, and Saka did come off with an injury in the first half. Now, I don't know if that was a re-aggravation of what he's previously had. It looked like he was either holding his hamstring or his groin, but we know Saka's been struggling anyway. He wasn't even in training for large spells of the previous week. Arteta seems to keep playing him into the ground, and people have been saying it's just Saka encouraging him to keep playing him and saying that he wants to keep playing. Regardless of the reasons, Saka really doesn't look at 100% fitness, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him miss out 1 or 2 game weeks, but we'll have to see what the news is. Regardless, I think there are a few replacements that people might be needing to make in their midfield. And then the final reason is, of course, a lot of people are on wildcard this week. And maybe you've got the likes of Son, Maddison, Salah, but you're looking for 1 or 2 other cheaper or cheap-ish midfield. So I think for that reason, a lot of people probably looking at the midfielders this week. And I think it's a good discussion to have. So I'm going to start by discussing 3 players below 6 million. Just in case you do have Eze in your team and you've got absolutely no money in the bank, or you need to make a serious downgrade to allow you to maybe get Salah in your team. So you've got Neto, Gordon and Gibbs White. Of course, Gordon is suspended this week. So if you need a player this week, then Gordon is not the one to go for. But I think Neto and Gordon would definitely be above Gibbs White for me, despite the price obviously being slightly more for Gibbs White, just due to the data. As you can see here, 0.49 and 0.47 non-penalty expected goal involvement for 5.6 million, I should say. That is really decent data. I mean, it's not blowing anyone out the water. This isn't exceptionally strong data. But this would suggest if they play 90 minutes in 2 consecutive games, across those 2 games, they would accumulate 1 expected goal involvement. And if they're getting you a goal involvement every other game, and they're playing all the games of the season, you're looking at probably about 19, 20 goal involvements across the season, which would be really strong for a £5.6 million midfielder. So I really like both of these. At the moment, it would be Neto that I would be going for 2 reasons. Neto has played every available minute for Wolves this season. As you can see, he has averaged 90 minutes per appearance this season, which is absolutely brilliant. So I like that. And the other reason is Wolves actually have decent fixtures from Game Week 8 to Game Week 12. As you can see here, they have the 5th best fixtures in the league over that spell. And to be honest, Neto at the moment looks relatively fixture-proof, which is not a sentence that I thought would be leaving my mouth. But I think at the moment, due to the suspension, due to the fixtures, due to the minutes, I think if you're going for a less than £6 million midfielder at the moment, for me, it would be Neto. And I really don't mind him as an option. But if you can stretch to a little bit more, the player that is really catching my eye at the moment, and a lot of people as well, is Ward-Prowse. Now, I said before, I'm finding this difficult because in the past, he's been so defensive. And yes, he does tick along with returns, but his data's never very particularly strong. And when you watch the games, he's just so deep. And whilst he's certainly not an attacking midfielder for West Ham, or I wouldn't say he was, he's almost playing more like a number 8. And at some points, even like an advanced number 8. And on top of that, the data is really strong. Now, yes, it is made up majoritarily through expected assists as opposed to expected goals. So I don't think that Ward-Prowse is a massive goal threat. But he's very creative. And he is still accumulating some goal threat. And I've actually seen him popping up in the box as well. So I really don't mind him as an option. And obviously, we know how good, especially from Game Week 10, West Ham's fixtures are. The next 2 against Villa and Newcastle aren't ideal. But from Game Week 10, their fixtures are so strong. And I am struggling to see anyone even close to that price of 6.3 that is getting close to Ward-Prowse as an option in FPL. And I'm certainly considering him on my wildcard. It's just about getting rid of that prior bias that he's sort of this defensive midfielder that will tick along with returns. Because putting up data like that, he truly is worth the £6.3 million price tag. So I think if you're going for anyone sort of 6.5 and below, and you can afford Ward-Prowse, I really do like him. And as I said, the reason that I really do like him is you can keep him long-term as well. The fixtures for West Ham are pretty good over the next sort of 10 to 12 game weeks. And because he is on so many set pieces, and because he's the main creative threat for that West Ham team, I feel like you can probably still start him in trickier fixtures and hope that he can get you some attacking returns. So I really do like Ward-Prowse. I'm trying my very best, whilst it is happening slowly, to change my prior perceptions around him as a player. But you can't really ignore the data. You can't ignore the eye test. He is a really, really solid option at the moment. I do have Almiron on there, but as you can see, Almiron's data this season, so bad. I mean, it was pretty bad last season, even when he went on that really nice run. But this season, for me, it's not even close to good enough to consider him. So whilst the fixtures are really there, I think the minutes haven't been ideal this season. As you can see, averaging about 70 minutes per appearance. And on top of that, the data is just really, really poor. And actually, the fixtures over the next 5 aren't ideal for Newcastle. I think they've got 3 away games in the next 5, and they've got Arsenal as one of those games. So they're not terrible fixtures, but if you're just looking over the sort of the next 4 or 5 game weeks, I think you can probably do better than Almiron personally. I've got Mitoma on this list because whilst the next few are pretty difficult for Brighton, from game week 10 onwards, Brighton have some of the best fixtures in the league. And you can see over the next 5 game weeks, Fantasy Football Hub actually have them as the 6th best fixtures in the league, despite, again, having Man City and Liverpool in the next 2. So I really, really do like Mitoma. And as you can see here, really solid data at 0.59 non-penalty expected goal involvement. So if you're looking a little bit longer term, and you don't necessarily mind that the next 2 aren't ideal, Mitoma is probably in the top 2 or 3 assets in midfield if you're looking at a long-term hold. And I can guarantee for those like myself that on a wildcard aren't going for the likes of Mitoma, in game week 10, 11, 12, whenever it is, I will probably be scrambling to try and get him into my team because the fixtures are there for some massive hauls. So I really like Mitoma. As you can see, the highest projected points on this list from game week 8 to 12, and I can certainly see why. I just think if I'm on a wildcard this week, I need to try and get a little bit more aggressive, I think. And bringing in a player with 2 really tricky fixtures over the next 2 just doesn't sit quite right with me. And it's one of the reasons why I absolutely love Diaby, because the fixtures are definitely there. The next 5 for Aston Villa, we're going to discuss Watkins later in the video, and you'll see the fixtures in a little bit more detail. But the next 5 for Villa are exceptionally good. You can see here the second highest projected points on this list for Diaby. And Diaby passes the eye test. When you watch Villa, he looks like a massive goal threat. He links up really well with Watkins, and he looks like he's going to get attacking returns. But the data's not actually that good. And I was a little bit disappointed because it looked good to start the season, but it's dropped off in some of the recent game weeks. Obviously, he performed very well in game week 7, but we're looking at a 0.41 non-penalty expected goal involvement, which isn't great, to be honest. I mean, you can see Gordon, Neto, Ward-Prowse, Mitoma, Mbeumo, Bowen, Luis Diaz. All of these players have better data than Diaby. But the fixtures are there, and I think I'm still happy having him as a pick. Of course, there is a slight injury doubt around him, which I don't have an update on at the time of me recording this. But if Diaby is fit and available, I still feel like he's good value at 6.7, just due to those fixtures. I mean, they're so good for Aston Villa coming up. But this would make me think that Diaby's not the obvious and only replacement for someone like an Eze. And I don't think he's essential on a wildcard by any means. So don't let anyone convince you of that. But that doesn't mean that he's not a good option. And again, at the moment, he's been in pretty much all of my wildcard drafts. I do have Mbeumo on this list. We won't discuss Mbeumo in too much detail because we've discussed him so much on this channel over the previous weeks. But pretty good data still, 0.6 non-penalty expected goal involvement. He gets 90 minutes in every game. The fixtures are a bit of a mixed bag for Brentford, but if you wanted to keep Mbeumo, he's starting to move towards differential status because so many people are selling him. People are wildcarding him out. That actually holding on to him might be the slightly more differential play. And this would suggest his data's still decent enough. So I don't mind the idea of keeping Brian Mbeumo. I've got Kulusevski on this list, but similarly to Almiron, the data's just not there. I mean, Kulusevski passes the eye test. He's an exceptionally good footballer, but I don't really like this data at all. So for me, he's just not even getting remotely close enough to the likes of Maddison, Son, and even a Udogie or Pedro Porro in defence for me to justify using my 3rd Spurs slot on him. So Kulusevski's not an option. Then we move on to 2 of my favourite options. And of course, the 2 most expensive options on this list, Bowen and Luis Diaz. And Bowen in particular, I really want in my wildcard draft. And at the moment, he is in my latest wildcard draft because the data, as you can see, is pretty much the best on this list along with Luis Diaz. But what he has is the best expected goals on this list. So what you can see in that column is the expected goal involvement, which is expected goals plus expected assists. So that measures goal threat and creativity. Bowen's actually got quite little creativity this season, and pretty much all of that stat over 0.5 is made up for expected goals. So he's a massive goal threat. And of course, we want our midfielders because they get an extra 2 points for a goal on top of an assist. We want them to get goals, and that also more than likely leads to bonus points as well. So Bowen is a player that I really want because of how high his goal threat is in comparison to other midfielders in and around him at that price point. And that is the main reason that I still do think he's worth the extra money on top of Ward-Prowse, because whilst their expected goal involvement is very, very similar, like I said, Ward-Prowse is more of a creative threat. And yes, he can still pick up bonus points. And if he gets 2 assists in a game, he can still come away with quite a few points. But Bowen with 1 goal could quite comfortably outscore Ward-Prowse with 2 assists. So I will always try to favour the goal threat if possible. And as a result, I do still think that Bowen is probably worth the extra money. And as you can see here, the 3rd highest projected points on this list. We've spoken about how good West Ham's fixtures are. I think Bowen is a seriously good option. And whilst it might be difficult if it's a straight Eze replacement and you don't have money in the bank, if you're on a wild card or you do have money in the bank, or maybe you're downgrading from a Saka if you do decide to sell him, I think Bowen has to be really, really seriously considered. And like I said, whilst the next 2 aren't great for West Ham, Bowen is in my latest wildcard draft, and I would like to try and squeeze him in. And then just to finish with Luis Diaz, we are going to speak about him in a little bit more detail a little bit later. But whilst he's the most expensive on this list, he does have the best data on this list. And if you do think you can predict his minutes and you think they'll be high enough, I do really like him as an option. But as I said, we'll actually discuss him in a second in relation to Darwin and Salah as well. So those are the mid-price midfielders. Just to recap, I think if you're going for a real cheapie, then Neto is probably the one. Really decent data, good fixtures coming up, and he has actually had the output to match the data so far this season as well. He's more creative than a goal threat, but I do really, really like him as a cheaper option. I think if you're going for a slightly more expensive option, maybe between sort of 6 and 6.5, I think you can't look elsewhere other than Ward-Prowse for me. I think he's a really, really good option. Obviously, in and around the same price as Eze, so he might offer you a real direct replacement. The next 2 fixtures aren't great, but I do still like him longer term, and the data is there to support it. I still think Diaby is worth the investment, despite the data not being great, just because the fixtures are there to attack. And I think Bowen and Diaz, despite being the most expensive, are really great options. And in particular, I really, really like the look of Bowen due to his goal threat. So that's a bit of a discussion around the mid-price midfielders. I would love to know, by the Game Week 8 deadline, what do you predict your midfield 5 will be? So if you're on a wild card, if you're going to make transfers, what will your midfield 5 be going into Game Week 8? Because I think we might start to see some deviation away from the template. So guys, in this next section, we're going to discuss Erling Haaland, Mohamed Salah, and Heung-min Son. This can get a bit messy, this. I actually re-recorded this twice now because I'm just going off loads of different tangents because it's such a complicated discussion. But a lot of people are having questions around, obviously, Haaland and Salah in particular. Do you need both of them? And if you are only going to have one, who is the one that you would want? Like, can you actually go for once without Erling Haaland in your team? Or can you maybe go without Mohamed Salah? Is he worth the £12.6 million that you would have to pay for him? And then on top of that, we've got sort of a semi-premium, you could call him, in a Heung-min Son at 9.3. Do you need him in there as well? Because let's say this is basically a freemium draft. Yes, you can get Haaland, Salah, and Son quite comfortably in a wildcard draft. And all of my wildcard drafts have had Haaland, Salah, Son. But if you want those 3, it's very, very difficult to also get Trippier and Watkins, and then on top of those 2, who I think it's pretty much impossible to get all 5 of those, then if you want a Bowen, you want an Alvarez, you want a Darwin or Diaz, it becomes pretty much impossible to get any number of those. So it is actually really, really tricky, even on a wildcard. And then if you think a lot of people won't be on their wildcard, trying to get these 3 in with just transfers is very, very, very difficult. Unless your team is in a perfect structure already, it can be very tricky. So I think it's important to discuss, sort of, do you need the 3 of them? And is there one that I'd be happier to drop? And of course, like I said, a lot of people at the moment is gaining a bit of momentum looking at going without Erling Haaland. And so I'd like to discuss him sort of in detail first. Then we'll discuss the 3 of them in their entirety and look at the fixtures in particular. The reason for it is the fixtures, right? We can see over the next 3, 2 away games, Arsenal, United away, Brighton at home. And if you're just looking at the colour scheme, 2 red and a grey. Then they've got Bournemouth, which is, of course, a fantastic fixture. Then Chelsea, Liverpool, Spurs, Villa. So really, up until Game Week 15, the fixtures are not good for Manchester City. After that, they then have 2 really good fixtures, but then they blank. So if you look at this in its entirety, absolutely, Haaland's fixtures are nowhere close to as good as Mohamed Salah and Heung-min Son. And there aren't that many captaincy opportunities, I don't think. And I'm not saying that you wouldn't be okay captaining him, but do you look at a lot of those fixtures and think there is a great haul potential there for Haaland? Maybe less so. And we spoke about this in a lot of detail. Manchester City struggle slightly more in 2 different ways. They are slightly worse away from home, as are a lot of teams. And they're also slightly worse against sort of top 6 sides away from home. So their sort of weak spot, and I say weak spot very lightly because they can still put quite a few goals past them, is the likes of an Arsenal away, a Villa away, a Chelsea away. These are the games in previous seasons where City have struggled to create a lot of chances, and Haaland's data has dropped off slightly, and so has his output. Now, the funny thing with Erling Haaland, when you look at this data, is his drop-off in data is still better than most other players. So we're still talking about against difficult opposition away from home. He puts up about a 0.7, 0.8 expected goal involvement. So no, it's nowhere close to what you see when Haaland's at home against Luton. But does it need to be? I think it's a very different discussion of, is Haaland as good of an option with these fixtures coming up as he is against good, easy opposition? Of course he's not. But is he still a good option? Absolutely. And would you expect Man City to score goals against Arsenal, Brighton and United? Yes, you would. Not as many, but if you're saying over the next 3, you expect City to score 6 or 7 goals, and they could score more because Brighton and Manchester United don't look good at the moment, how many are you expecting Haaland to be involved in? 2 or 3 goals, maybe a couple of assists? And if he does that, his ownership, yes, you are using the funds elsewhere, but you are really betting against him doing well. And not only are you betting against him doing well, you need the alternatives that you go for to perform incredibly well. And because there's not a direct replacement, it's not like you're going for Harry Kane instead of Haaland. Yes, you could be going for Salah instead of Haaland, but then there are other players, right? You need to use that money elsewhere. So you not only need Haaland to not deliver massively, you need your alternatives too. And do I bet against... Am I happy betting on someone else against Haaland enough? Not particularly. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that selling Haaland's a great shout, but I understand why you would want to do it. And I think the key reason that you would want to is because you now have 2 really good captaincy alternatives in Salah and Son that are coming ahead now with really, really nice fixtures and appear to be in form, right? They are performing well. They're getting attacking returns. And with these fixtures coming up, you could comfortably not have Erling Haaland and have an exceptionally strong captain every single week. So if you remove Haaland's fixtures completely, let's say you went without Haaland and you just had Son and Salah, you can get a captaincy rotation of Luton, Everton, Forest, Luton, Wolves, Villa. But again, in game week 13 anyway, Haaland's got a difficult fixture. So that's the only difficult one there is against Villa. Then Fulham, Sheffield United, Palace, Forest, Everton. Those fixtures are so good. You've got great options for captaincy in Salah and Son, rotating between the 2 of them really nicely. And Haaland, the only fixtures really that you would desperately want Haaland for, and you would say he's an absolutely critical captaincy shout, is Bournemouth at home in 11, but in that week, Salah's got Luton away. And then in game week 16 against Luton away, but in that week, Salah's got Crystal Palace away. And then in game week 17 against Crystal Palace, Heung-min Son's got Nottingham Forest. So I'm not saying that Haaland's not the best captaincy shout in 11 and 16. He comfortably is. But in the only 2 weeks that you would say is absolutely essential as a captaincy, I do think you also have an alternative in Salah and Son. So fixtures-wise, I definitely don't think you need Erling Haaland. My other concern, though, other than just Erling Haaland is fantastic, City will still score goals and his data will still be strong, is I'm saying now, right, I want to captain Heung-min Son in game week 12 against Wolves. It's very difficult to know if Son will still be performing at this level because not many people, not many assets are as consistent as Erling Haaland. Salah is an exception, right? Salah is consistent and he has been across a few seasons now. So I would comfortably say that regardless of what happens over the next few, I probably would be happy captaining Salah in 14 and 15 against Fulham and Sheffield United. But Sonny is very dependent on what's happening with this system. Is Richarlison playing on the left? Is it Solomon? How's Kulusevski linking up? What is Postecoglou wanting to do with this system? And can Heung-min Son get back to his very best? Right? We've seen over the last 3 that he has looked fantastic, right? And at the moment, I would say Son at 9.3 is as close to essential as Salah and Haaland. But do we know that in 7 or 8 game weeks, he still will be performing at that level and you will still trust him enough with the armband? No, I don't think you can say that. Whereas with Erling Haaland, yes, he's not been fantastic in the last few, but do I know that I would still be comfortable captaining him in any of these fixtures if I had to in 7 or 8 game weeks? Yes, I do. So it's almost that if this goes wrong, right, and if you bring Son and Salah in and you decide to spread your funds and go without Haaland, and actually Salah just goes back to being a little bit creative, the odd assist here and there, and Son drops off a little bit because either he's moved back out to the left or he's playing through the middle, but he's just struggling a little bit, and we're seeing hints of what we saw in the previous season, you might be looking at your team and going, I don't actually feel comfortable captaining many other assets. And whilst Haaland's fixtures aren't great, if Haaland continues to tick along with the goals, it may well be in that in game week 12, for example, you actually do fancy captaining him against Chelsea away. Or even, like I said, in game week 10, Manchester United are not a great defence at the moment. Would you be happy captaining Haaland? Probably. So it might seem easy at the moment to go, I look at these fixtures. Game week 11 is the only one I'd want to captain Haaland. I can captain Salah instead. I'm going to get rid of him. But that's a very brave call when we don't know exactly what's going to happen with Son. Salah has been consistent, but can you rely on him every week to outscore Haaland? I'm not so sure. So I guess to put that together, If there is a time to sell Erling Haaland, this is it. This is the only time I can imagine, unless he's injured, of course, that it does make a small fraction of sense. Because I think with the fixtures and with how well Son and Salah are performing at the moment, probably both on penalties, we think Son is, both getting decent minutes, I think you can get a really nice captaincy rotation with them. But if anything happens to them, whether that be injury or a drop-off in form, it's going to be very difficult to get back to Erling Haaland. I think Son in particular, I should have probably said this earlier on, is suffering with a sort of knock or injuries at the moment, and he's not quite at 100%. If Son gets injured, trying to find the money to get up to Erling Haaland and sell him to allow you to get a decent captaincy option in once again alongside Salah might be pretty tricky. So for me, I can't justify going without Erling Haaland. I would want him. And to be honest, I can't justify going out without Mohamed Salah either. I think when I look at the fixtures and when I look at the data and when I look at what Salah is as an asset, nailed on penalties, so consistent, Salah is equally over this set as important as Haaland. If I were to drop one, it would be Haaland. So if you're sat there thinking the only way I get to Salah is by selling Haaland, it is tempting because I think Salah is a better option over this set period than Erling Haaland, in my personal opinion, just due to the fixtures. But it is a risk. So I wouldn't be dropping Salah. Salah is not an option. I wouldn't be dropping Haaland either. If there are only two assets that I could be selecting on my wildcard, it would be Haaland and Salah. If I had to select two that I must have, it's both of them. I think they are worth the money. I think you can comfortably get both of them in a wildcard draft with a lot of the other players you would want. So for me, Haaland and Salah are essential. So if you are to drop one, I think it's Heung-min Son. Now, that isn't to say he's not a good option. I just think there is still a smidge of doubt around whether he will start through the middle consistently. I think on top of that, as I said, he is suffering with fitness and possible knock. So at the moment, his minutes haven't been great. And even earlier on in the season, maybe it was because he was suffering still, his minutes haven't been particularly good throughout the season. He's getting a lot of subs between sort of 70 and 80 minutes. So I think minutes are very important. We still don't know 100% that he's on penalties. Again, we don't know about the position longer term. And on top of that, based on what we saw last season, yes, it was probably an outlier, but Son hasn't been the most consistent FPL asset in recent seasons, whereas Salah has been, and Haaland was last season, and he's been very decent this season as well. So if there is one to drop, it probably is Son. And I think you can still get a decent captaincy rotation with Salah and Haaland, right? You can get Brighton, Everton, Forest, Bournemouth, Brentford, Liverpool, Fulham, Sheffield United, Luton, Palace. It's only game week 18 that you would maybe want to captain someone else. So I don't think that you need Son in your team. I suppose he would be the one, if I were to drop one of the three, it would probably be him. And the other reason is I just think there are a lot of other really well-priced midfielders that you could select instead. Like I said, Bowen, Diaby, we've discussed some of them already. You could go for a Luis Diaz maybe as well to double up on the Liverpool midfield. Of course, Maddison is a really good option at sort of £1.4 million less than Heung-min Son. So hopefully that discussion makes sense. We're doing that for around 10 minutes. All of that to say, if you can get Haaland, Salah, Son, they would be three of my first names on a wildcard. And for me, I would much rather drop someone like a Watkins or a Trippier than dropping one of those three, because I think if you can have all three, you've got excellent captaincy shouts in almost every single week, and you at least have the option there to back against Haaland. And if you get it wrong and Haaland smashes it, well, then you just default back to Haaland. If he's just comfortably outscoring Salah and Son every week, at least you've got him there to default the captaincy back to. So for me, the three of them, if you're only selecting two, it's Haaland and Salah. But if you must drop one of Haaland and Salah, believe it or not, I would probably drop Haaland, and Salah would be the one premium that I would want to carry forward. I'd love to know your opinion on this discussion down below in the comments. Who do you think is essential? Will you have all three of them? And let me know if you're on your wild card as well, because I think with transfers, it's going to be very difficult to get Haaland, Salah and Son. So let's say you're not convinced by my argument that Mohamed Salah is arguably the most essential player to own in FPL at the moment, or maybe you want to own a double up. I thought it'd be worth discussing Darwin and Luis Diaz, both around that £7.5 million price tag, and both definitely really good options in their own right. And I myself am looking at, obviously, you now know that I will be having Mohamed Salah in my wildcard draft. I am looking at trying to get one of Darwin and Diaz in for two reasons. Again, the fixtures are so good for Liverpool coming up. Across the next five, they don't have a single bad fixture. I know Brighton and Brentford are both kind of grey fixtures on the fixture difficulty rating, but they're not bad fixtures at all. And those middle three against Everton, Forest and Luton are so good. So I will want probably another Liverpool player. It's just whether I can rely on minutes enough with Darwin and Diaz, and whether I think they are good enough options in comparison to someone like, for Darwin, he's competing with the likes of Alvarez and Watkins either side for price. For Luis Diaz, he's fighting with the likes of a Bowen in my team. So it is very difficult to justify them, but I do really want to have another Liverpool attacker. So Don't need to discuss the fixtures because we already spoke about how good they are. I think really for Darwin and Diaz, it comes down to minutes because the data will be there because Liverpool are one of the best attacks in the league. I mean, every single season, even last season, when people were saying they weren't great, obviously they had a really strong end to the season. But in previous seasons, they've had exceptionally strong attacking data, and they've just continued that this season. It doesn't matter whether it was Mane, now Diaz on the left, whether it's Gakpo or Darwin through the middle. Liverpool just have the sort of philosophy in their team under Klopp to attack, and they will create a ridiculous number of chances. That being said, I've never seen anything quite like the data that Darwin puts up, and I know it's frustrating because last season I just kept saying Darwin's got good data, so he's a good FPL option, and he just didn't convert on that. But I think it's very important to address this discussion around Darwin being a poor finisher. In every season that we have access to, Darwin has demonstrated a good ability to finish. In fact, in his last season at Benfica, he actually overperformed his XG by 7. Now, the keepers in that league probably aren't as good as the keepers in the Premier League. That is absolutely fine. However, he still did overperform, which would suggest that he wasn't a poor finisher at Benfica. He then obviously moved to Liverpool, where he had a very, very poor season with respect to his conversion and his performance against his expected data. So last season, I will agree, his finishing was very, very poor. This season, he's actually slightly overperformed his XG so far. So he's accumulated 2.76 XG and he scored 3 goals. So what we've got so far are seasons of Darwin being a decent finisher, one season of him being a poor finisher, and then this season thus far, whilst it has been a very small sample, he's back to finishing very well. So could last season have just been the outlier? Could last season have been him settling into the league, gaining confidence? Maybe he was lacking confidence at points too. But now, will he go back to his ways of being a decent finisher? We'll have to wait and see. I'm not suggesting for a second that Darwin is going to get the output that we get from Haaland, but all we need for Darwin to do is just finish slightly more of his chances, and he will be a great option, and also get the minutes as well. So with Darwin, you can see so far this season, he's averaged 36 minutes per game, which is the big issue with him, is that we just can't feel confident enough that he's going to start. And you can see, when he does, is ridiculous data. 11.4 FPL points per 90, 8.96 expected FPL points per 90, 1.27 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90, and over 1 non-penalty expected goals. He is the only player in the league that gets anywhere close to Haaland, and for large spells will outperform him with respect to underlying data. And as you can see here, he is involved in over 3.6 big chances per 90. He himself gets over 3 big chances per 90. And last season, he got over 2 big chances per 90 across a much bigger sample size. So what I want to reiterate to you is that Darwin gets a silly amount of chances to score goals, and I mean a really silly amount. And based on historical data across previous seasons, he's actually not as bad of a finisher as people thought he was last year. And based on what we've seen this season, eye test and data, he's actually converting his chances fairly well. All we need from Darwin is for him to start more games than he misses. And I think he is so well and truly worth the £7.4 million price tag. So all it comes down to with Darwin, if you want to select him, is do you think he'll start enough games? Now, of course, we've got a sort of minor injury to Gakpo. We've got a suspension for Jota. So I think game week 8 looks very good. I would be incredibly shocked if Darwin doesn't start in game week 8. But in game week 9, he may be returning late once again from international duty. And then that will happen once again, or is it around game week 13 or 14, he'll be returning from international duty once again. And when he does that, it's very unlikely that he then starts the first game week back in the Prem, because he's always travelling quite far from South America. Now, he might come back a few days early this time, or it might be that Klopp just chucks him straight back in. So I'm not saying he definitely misses out in game week 9, but I think there's always an increased likelihood. Obviously, if Gakpo's still injured at that point, then it makes it a lot more likely that I think Darwin gets chucked into the 11. But I just guess there is this overwhelming issue with his minutes, right? He can be as good as he wants with respect to his data. He can improve his conversion. If he's averaging less than 50 minutes per game, then I don't want him in my team. So we need Darwin to get more minutes. And if you think he will, and you're feeling confident that he will, I think he's comfortably the best striker to partner with Erling Haaland in FPL at the moment. Luis Diaz is a very different option. His minutes are actually a lot more secure. As you can see, he's averaged 65 minutes per game. And I would say quite comfortably, he is the best left winger, or left forward, you could say, for Liverpool. I think he's the only natural one in that team. I think all of Jota, Darwin and Gakpo are actually better through the middle. And I think Diaz is their first choice left winger. And I think he'll get more minutes than Darwin. The issue with Diaz is whilst his data isn't bad, it's not even close to the likes of a Darwin, and it's nowhere near as good as Salah or Haaland. He just puts up good data. So as you can see here, 5.83 expected FPL points per 90, He's putting up pretty decent goal threat at 0.45 and 0.19 expected assist. And he's involved in just under 1 big chance per 90. So these are really good stats. But, I mean, it's less than half of what we're getting from Darwin. And, I mean, yes, Diaz could be getting more minutes. But even if Darwin gets slightly less minutes, I would still probably rather have Darwin just for the amount of chances that he gets. So I think if I were to choose one at the moment, even with the fact that I think his minutes are slightly more secure with Diaz, I think it would be Darwin Núñez. So I think if you want a double up, you go for Darwin and you just hope he gets enough minutes. Obviously, if you don't want to own Darwin because you are still convinced he's a bad finisher and you do think that Diaz will get significantly more minutes, I don't think Diaz is a bad option. We spoke about him earlier on in the video. He's got really, really solid data here. And I think he is a really nice option at 7.5 million. If you can't stretch to someone like a Maddison or you don't own a Saka or a Bruno or someone like that, Diaz at a little bit of a step down could be an exceptionally strong option. So I would love to know down below in the comments, do you plan on owning any Liverpool assets outside of Salah? And if so, who will it be? So guys, I thought it would just be worth having a discussion around Mr. 23-pointer, Ollie Watkins, because my word, what a performance. And I will hold my hands up. I got this one horribly wrong. And I often get things wrong, but I don't usually get them horribly wrong. And Ollie Watkins is one that I did, because I actually remember saying to quite a few people, Ollie Watkins is great. He ticks along very nicely with 5 to 9 pointers. But he's never going to be a player that regularly gets you hauls or gets you that sort of big 17-plus pointer. And then in the very week that I was giving people that advice, he comes away with a 23-pointer, 5 attacking returns. I won't say lucky because he performed incredibly well, but if you look at the data, it was less than 1 expected goal involvement. So a mixture of poor goalkeeping, but also well-taken chances meant that he came away with 5 returns from less than 1 expected return. So in any other game, if he wasn't absolutely on fire with his finishing, and again, maybe a little bit of poor goalkeeping, you maybe wouldn't expect to get 5 returns from that game. But well done to owners if you did keep him and you kept patient. And Ollie Watkins is a great option, right? For so many different reasons. Firstly, look at those next 5 fixtures. Wolves, West Ham, Luton, Forest, Fulham. 3 of them being at home and the 2 away games being against Wolves and Forest. So fixtures are absolutely there to bring in the main man, Ollie Watkins. Minutes have been pretty good as well. He has had a few early subs, which in previous seasons we've not seen. Ollie Watkins has always been a 90-minute man. I don't think he's a 90-minute man anymore, but he is sort of an 80 to 90-minute man. You can see here, he's averaging 84 minutes per game. So that is going for him. But he has overperformed his data massively. And you can say this is due to a number of reasons. Luck. You can say that you think he's an exceptional finisher. Whatever you want to say. All I would say is previous historical data would suggest that Watkins is not a great finisher. And I think if you watch Villa, and this isn't insulting because genuinely he's one of my favourite players in the Premier League, and I really do mean that. I love Ollie Watkins. He's not, I don't think, a world-class clinical finisher. I don't think we are expecting him to be at a conversion rate similar to the likes of Son and Haaland. I just don't think he's that kind of player. So that would suggest to me that he's been slightly lucky along with some confident, maybe well-converted chances. But you can see here, this season, he's averaging 8.22 FPL points per 90, but his expected FPL points per 90 is almost half of that at 4.85. Massively overperforming. And actually, his data, it's okay. It's good. It's average. Averagely good, I would say. At a 0.53 expected goal involvement per 90. He's not on penalties anymore. The data is good, but not excellent. He's overperformed massively, but the fixtures are coming up there for him. So I still think he's a great option. The data's good. He's obviously confident now. He's in form, whatever you want to say. The minutes are still strong enough. So whilst he's not on pens, whilst he is overperforming, and whilst the data isn't mind-blowing, I still think with the fixtures coming up, he's probably worth the £8 million price tag, and I think he's a great option. But maybe a counter-argument would be, you've missed that 23-pointer. You are not, if you didn't own Watkins for that, you are not getting that 23-pointer, and he will not do that every week because he never puts up enough expected data. He doesn't get enough chances to get that many attacking returns, and no player really does. But I think he will go back to, after that, ticking along very nicely. I think he'll get the odd assist here. I think he'll continue to score goals. And I think with these fixtures coming up, especially Luton at home in game week 10, he will get attacking returns. But I think there are other options that will be able to match him for cheaper. I think if Darwin gets enough minutes, I think he could. I think Alvarez, despite the fixtures, could still do very well too. And you could even switch to a 5-man midfield and a 4 at the back if you want to go for a Kieran Trippier. Could Kieran Trippier outscore or match Watkins? Absolutely, if he's the sort of comparison point and you can only own one of them. So Watkins feels like a very safe option. His minutes are secure, the fixtures are there, and the data's good. But I do think that you are being swayed by the 23 points. And of course, you can say, well, that happened. He got 5 attacking returns. But if he'd have got 2 returns or 3 returns, which the data maybe suggested is what he would have got on a normal day, on an average day, would everyone be so concerned about bringing him in? Maybe not. And were you considering bringing him in before this? Because if Watkins was towards the top of your list and you really thought he was one of the best options already, then absolutely. But if you are just looking at that 23 pointer and saying, that is the reason I want to bring him in, then maybe I'm less sure. Also, maybe you could get slightly better value with Diaby. We spoke about the fact that Diaby's data isn't great, but it's only slightly lower than Ollie Watkins. And of course, you're getting him for £1.3 million less. And then can you use that £1.3 million elsewhere? Do you need the double up of Diaby and Watkins? Maybe a triple up with Matty Cash? Potentially not. So I kind of wanted to offer both opinions here because I can't sit here and say Watkins is a bad option. He's just got 23 points, 5 incredibly good fixtures coming up, good data, good minutes. There's very little to dislike about him other than just to say he's not going to do that every week. And I think there are other assets for a cheaper price with also good fixtures that could match or outscore him over the coming game weeks. So I also want to discuss Kieran Trippier because he's got 30 points in the last 2 game weeks, obviously performing incredibly well. And as I said, it is interesting because if you're on your wildcard, you will know that if you want Haaland, Salah, and Son, and you also want a well-balanced team, it's very difficult to also get Trippier and Watkins. So we've just discussed Watkins, we'll discuss Trippier here, but a lot of people force to make the decision between one of them because if you have all 5, I just think the rest of your team's going to look really, really poor. Yes, you can make downgrades with some cheaper defenders, maybe 2 cheap defenders, maybe a Neto in midfield to try and afford it, maybe like a Solanke up top or someone like that, but it really does still make it incredibly difficult. So I think you probably choose one of Trippier or Watkins, and Trippier is equally as good of an option as Ollie Watkins. 6.8 million still feels incredibly cheap. The fixtures are still there for Newcastle, but I will just note that arguably their best 2 fixtures have gone. 6 and 7, Sheffield United and Burnley. They were 2 of the best fixtures in this run for them. The next 5 are decent, but they do have 3 away games, and one of their home games is against Arsenal. We know they are much better defensively at home, and if one of their home games is one that you would expect them to concede, maybe not as many clean sheets as you would first think, especially the fact that West Ham are looking pretty good. Wolves are actually decent enough going forward. I actually look at these 5 and I don't see tons of, I don't see any definite clean sheets at least for me anyway, as you did with sort of the Sheffield United and Burnley games. But of course, Kieran Trippier has much more than clean sheet potential. But I would just say, like I said, that the fixtures aren't quite as good as maybe they were when you took 6 and 7 into account as well. But the data is good for Kieran Trippier. It was fantastic last season, and it continues to be one of the best in the league for defenders. Not quite at the levels of kind of like an Estepinian and even a Ben Chilwell this season, but he's very consistent, Kieran Trippier. So you can see here, still getting good minutes, despite the fact that there have been rumours that he might get rotated. He may well still do so, but the minutes have been good so far this season. He has overperformed his expected data at 6.34 FPL points per 90 with only 4.33 expected FPL points per 90. So far this season, he's overperforming his expected data by sort of 2 FPL points per 90, which is quite significant, and not many players will do that across the entire season. So he either has to improve slightly or see a bit of a drop-off. And he continues to have absolutely no goal threat. But don't let this put you off because it was the same last season and you don't own Kieran Trippier for goals. But he's not going to get you many goals. He might get you the odd free kick or long shot. But generally, you're not owning him for the goal threat. You're owning him for that creativity. And it is still really good at 0.3 expected assists per 90. But it's not 4 assists in 2 games good. And again, they are 2 incredibly good fixtures. And getting 3 assists in 1 game is not something that happens very often for any players. So in a similar way to what I said with Watkins, with his 23-pointer, you're not getting 18 and 12 pointers every week from Kieran Trippier. I can guarantee that to you because the fixtures aren't there for it and the data's not there for it. But is Kieran Trippier still one of the better defenders to own in FPL? Absolutely. The data is still good. The fixtures are still good as well. But just again, temper your expectations. You won't get clean sheets every week. You're not going to get assists every week. I suppose the real question with Kieran Trippier is like, is he worth 2.3 or 2.2 million over someone like a Dan Burn? That's very tricky because Dan Burn really does carry little goal threat or assist threat. I know he did pick up a goal recently, but generally speaking, it's a clean sheet you're getting from him. Kieran Trippier not only is good for attacking returns, but he's also good for bonus points as well. And a lot of the time, even if he doesn't get the attacking return, as a result of the bonus points, he will outscore the likes of Trippier and maybe even, Burn and even the likes of Fabian Schär by maybe 1, 2, or 3 points. So maybe he is. I just think we're maybe being blinded by that triple assist. And the fact that, of course, he got the assist in the most recent game and the bonus points as well. But the data would just suggest that he's just going to tick along pretty nicely. 1 assist every 3 or 4 games, maybe something like that. So over the next 5 games, if he doesn't continue performing at a ridiculous rate, I would expect 2 clean sheets and 1 assist. Is he worth 6.8 at that? No, not for me, probably. When you can get some other really good defenders. However, if he continues getting the assist at the rate that he is, and if I'm wrong about these fixtures, and actually they can pick up 3 or 4 clean sheets, and he gets 2 assists, then yeah, he probably is worth the 6.8. So it really comes down to your prediction of how you see this going. I've not ruled out Kieran Trippier on my wildcard. I just think if it is one of Trippier or Watkins, I think I maybe prefer Watkins slightly. And I just don't see him keeping up the rate of what we've seen in the last 2 weeks. And again, I've missed those points. I think something that I've done poorly this season, but something that I would usually advocate trying to avoid doing, is trying to get points, like points chase from previous weeks. I'm not getting Watkins' 23-pointer. I'm not getting Kieran Trippier's 18 and 12-pointer. Similarly to when I brought in Sterling, I shouldn't have done that because I wasn't getting his 19-pointer against Luton. You need to look ahead to future weeks. And I don't see such haul potentials in the coming weeks. So let me know what you think of that down below in the comments. Probably will be unpopular because I know a lot of people just love Kieran Trippier and they see him as absolutely essential. I think it's just important, especially as a content creator, to offer both sides of the story and just say that I don't think anyone's truly essential and that he's definitely been overperforming, but I still do love him as an FPL option. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 8 preview. Slightly longer than usual, but hopefully you did enjoy it. And if you did enjoy today's video, please do drop a like. Let's aim for 2,000 likes as always. And make sure to subscribe as well. I do really appreciate it. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.